of acknowledgement, and then a few words about tonight's agenda to get us started. In addition to our co-sponsors and our speakers, whom I will be introducing in just a bit, I want to give a wholehearted thanks and congratulations and virtual hug to Joanne Nowak, who, as always, has done an absolutely wonderful job of organizing this event, of pulling together all that brings us together. And by the way, working with our fantastic undergraduate Blum students who are also in the room. And so thank you, Joanne, for everything that you do, and especially for making this entire event possible. In addition to the activism that we're going to be highlighting tonight and talking to one another and to you about, what brings us together is something I'm very, very proud of. It's the release of the Blum Center's People's Guide to the Green New Deal. A fantastic and lively and inspiring overview of what the Green New Deal has come to mean for environmental justice activists locally and across the country. We're going to open tonight's event with an overview of that document from Simone Stewart, who's a doctoral candidate in mechanical engineering here at UCSB. She has been with the Blum Center since 2019 and has taken a leadership role in many of our activities. And along with Chloe Gentile, who is a doctoral candidate in the music department, played an absolutely central role. And, you know, this went through many drafts and a great deal of research, but there's just so much creative energy that's gone into this document. So I want to thank them both for pulling this together. We'll be hearing from Simone Stewart with an overview and some highlights, and then we'll be letting you all know how you can access this wonderful document. And then after that, we'll be hearing from our panelists, whom I will introduce after we hear from Simone. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Simone Stewart.
Thank you so much, Professor O'Connor, for the introduction. As Professor O'Connor said, my name is Simone Stewart. I am a graduate intern at the Blum Center. And so I will be going over just a brief overview of the Green New Deal. Just a brief recap, no notes need to be taken, but this is just to make sure that everyone is on the same page for those of you who are curious to know the basics of the plan or may be new to this. So the Green New Deal draws on historical precedents, but alludes to President Franklin D. Roosevelt's large-scale New Deal plan for economic growth and recovery, which was put into place to help Americans move past the ramifications of the Great Depression. From this plan, many coalitions were born, like the Workers' Progress Administration, as well as initiatives like the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The New Deal had many positive social and economic effects, though it is important to note that it was built on a structural foundation of inequality. So the New Deal going forward is heavily influenced by this foundation of inequality to remedy that. The specific principles in the Green New Deal are ultimately a plan to achieve environmental and economic justice. It specifically underlines the need for a just transition and a new social contract to ensure everyone can participate in this new clean economy. It is important to note that the proposals of this scale have not been seen since the Green New Deal, since the New Deal, and World War II mobilization. Rihanna Gunn Wright, who is pictured at the top, is one of the original architects working with the New Consensus think tank. And this resolution was proposed to Congress by Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ed Markey, pictured on the bottom right, in 2019. So it's really important for us to talk about how environmental and economic social justice are all intertwined. One of the gaps in the original New Deal plan was the healing of structural inequities, which happens through a combination of economic and environmental justice. Economic justice seeks to address the longstanding socioeconomic inequalities exacerbated by climate change, including creating millions of jobs to build the green economy and establishing universal healthcare, among many other tenets. Environmental justice seeks to have participation from everyone in the development of environmental laws and initiatives, people across all races, income levels, and national origin. But it is important to note that not everyone from all facets of society can participate in a new economy unless their economic needs have been met. So there are many alternative proposals to the Green New Deal, including the Feminist New Deal and the Red New Deal. These deals often center frameworks for marginalized communities and call for the inclusion of principles in the Green New Deal which are not specifically outlined. For example, the Feminist New Deal centers the leadership, especially that of women of color, who are at the front line of the climate crisis. And the Red New Deal, for example, seeks to divest from colonial tools such as capitalism and the military and prison industrial complexes. So we will focus on how to specifically get involved in the Santa Barbara community tonight, thanks to our wonderful panelists. But this guide outlines resources to encourage people, especially youth, to get involved in local Green New Deal plans and initiatives. In fact, this is tied very much to our very first event, which some of you in the chat said that you had participated in. Thank you for coming to that. So we held a public forum in fall of 2019 to specifically start a conversation about how the Green New Deal could be used as an organizing framework to bring together environmental and social justice movements along the California Central Coast. So this public forum featured a variety of panelists from local community organizations, some of whom are here tonight, including Food and Water Watch, Mexico Indigenous Community Organizing Project, also known as MyCOP, the Community Environmental Council, PAWS, as well as the Central Coast Climate Justice Network, or C3JN. The goal of this event was to launch a broad, publicly engaged conversation about the need for transformational thought and action in response to the challenges of climate change, and the goal is to create a more equitable and resilient environmental future. So the panelists discussed a number of plans of action that they had created, proposals that had been developed.
Simone, I'm sorry, can you do a sound check? Maybe move up a little because your mic. That's better. I think you need to be a little closer because your mic keeps dropping out.
Keeps dropping. I'm sorry about that, everyone.
Okay.
Okay. But so we, our panelists discussed various plans of action, proposals that had been developed within their own groups through collaboration with others. The themes of environmental justice were touched on, including MyCOP's work to stop nuclear waste sites at Ormond Beach, as well as the construction of another power plant on Oxnard's coastline. They also discussed working with community gardens to perform public land trusts to continue passing down Indigenous traditions, as well as the amplification of marginalized voices through the creation of Indigenous advisory committees and leadership. This also touched on inclusive democratic organizing work, including that work done by Food and Water Action's creation of bilingual house meetings to mobilize grassroots organizing, and also policy work, including the Community for Environmental Council's plan for many proposals that already have concepts that have been built in and just need funding, including the affordable and clean mobility solutions, as well as a Santa Barbara food action plan developed with the help of C3JN to create sustainable structures enforcing food security in Santa Barbara. After the presentations from the panelists, the audience got to ask some questions which illuminated the discussion around the Green New Deal in our community that were pertinent in 2019. This included questions about funding the Green New Deal, how the Green New Deal can reflect different interests, experiences, and communities, including situations like rural versus urban concerns, and how to have conversations with those who don't see climate change as a fundamental issue. Our panelists discuss lobbying at the political level and funding, how conversations or lobbying on the political level, sorry, for funding, and how conversations around the Green New Deal can best reflect the community if we get the community involved at the local level. So less than 2 years later, we are in a fundamentally different reality with a new administration, a shift in Senate control, and talks of a green stimulus package to address the socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic. The prospects for transformational environmental and social change may be unprecedented. So in the second forum, we are excited to discuss how effective the Green New Deal has been in action, what it looks like in practice with a focus specifically on the Central Coast, and how this new reality in which we find ourselves is helping or hindering our collective ability to work towards transformational environmental and social justice. So with that, we have done a brief overview of a lot of information, and I will be passing it back to Professor O'Connor to introduce our panelists. So thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Simone. That was wonderful. And again, I really commend this wonderful People's Guide that they've put together. Among other things, reading through it, it's very heartening, because as we're watching with some frustration what's going on in Washington, although absolutely with a much bigger glimmer of hope than we've had in quite a while, that's for sure. The emphasis on the local, which is where the action really is these days, is truly heartening and inspiring, but also gives us all a lot of work to do. So with that, we are going to hear from some of our local Central Coast activists who have been working on this issue to bring the vision and some of the organizing tools we talked about at our last forum to the next stage. And of course, the next stage is always an ongoing process. I'll introduce all four of our speakers. We will then hear from each one of them. We'll then follow that with some Q&A and then open it up to all of you. So our first speaker will be Professor David Pellow, who is the Dielson and Department Chair of Environmental Studies here at UCSB, where he also directs the Global Environmental Justice Project. His research examines case studies of environmental privilege and environmental racism, as well as the successes and challenges of environmental movements and activism. He is published in such journals as the Annual Review of Sociology, the Du Bois Review, and the Annual Review of Public Health. He has also been involved in numerous environmental justice initiatives, including a current research collaboration with the Central Coast Climate Justice Network that focuses on local efforts to develop a Green New Deal. He is also volunteered for or served on the boards of directors of several community-based national and international organizations dedicated to improving the living and working environments for people of color, immigrants, indigenous peoples, and working class communities. Our next speaker will be Ana Rosa Rizzo Centino. Ana Rosa was elected to the Maywood City Council in 2007 and also served as mayor. Her local work in Maywood focused on government transparency, support for working families, and ensuring police conduct reform, as well as support for environmental justice issues, such as clean drinking water. Ana Rosa has received the Woman of Action Award from Assembly Speaker John A. Perez, as well as awards from Supervisor Gloria Molina and Congresswoman Lucille Roybal Allard. She previously worked as senior organizer with Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action. And most recently, she joined One Step a la Vez as executive director. That's an organization that supports youth empowerment through outreach, engagement, and intervention services to the communities of the Santa Clara Valley. Ana Rosa also serves on the boards of La Casa de la Raza, Santa Barbara County Action Network, SB Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, aka CLUE, and the City of Santa Barbara Creeks Commission. She is also, and I'll add this word, a proud UCSB alumna. And we're proud that she's a UCSB alumna. Nadia, our third speaker will be Nadia Aboush-Anab, she currently works as the Advocacy and Events Director for SB CAN, the Santa Barbara County Action Network, which advocates for economic, environmental, and social justice locally. She's a recent graduate from the UCSB Environmental Studies Department, another proud graduate. Nadia has researched local efforts and challenges to developing a Green New Deal and proposed avenues for unifying related efforts to support environmental and social justice. Nadia has also
apoyar la justicia social y del medio ambiente. Nadia también ha trabajado previamente con necesidades
Advising Center and has been involved with Food Not Bombs on campus, which provides meals for the unhoused community in Isla Vista. Nadia also serves on the board of Santa Barbara's only official housing cooperative, which reflects her view that cooperative housing and mutual aid are promising solutions for a more sustainable and just future. I'm very gratified to hear that and to say that, because the Blum Center is soon going to be inaugurating a cooperative economics initiative. So Nadia will be drawing on your expertise. And finally, our fourth speaker is Nikayla Jefferson. Nikayla is a PhD student in the Political Science Department here at UCSB. She is currently a writer and organizer for the Sunrise Movement, a youth-led organization that advocates for political action on climate change. She also formerly served as the co-chair of the Bernie 2020 California campaign. Nikayla is a Public Voices Fellow with the Op-Ed Project and the Yale Program on Climate Communication. And she's published work in the LA Times, The Guardian, and The Nation, as well as other media outlets. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists, starting with David Pellow.
Wonderful. All right, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm really pleased to be here tonight. Thank you to the Blum Center and the Fund for Santa Barbara for organizing us. Tonight, I am wearing two hats, one as a member of the Central Coast Climate Justice Network, and the other as chair and faculty member of UCSB's Environmental Studies program. I'm proud to represent both of those organizations. The Central Coast California Climate Justice Network is a network of social justice, environmental organizations, and leaders who are committed to a climate movement that advances social, economic, and environmental justice for Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. Now, as a participant in both the Climate Justice Network and as a faculty member here at UCSB, I have been very fortunate to work with some amazing students who've done some really important work that is a really nice companion to the Blum Center's brand new report on the Green New Deal. The UCSB Climate Justice Student Lab has just released a report titled The Green New Deal: How Far We've Come, a study of the Green New Deal policy in the US. This is an analysis of all state-level Green New Deal legislation across the United States, including those bills that have been proposed and those that have passed. There are 12 state bills in all, 4 of which have passed: New York, Maine, New Mexico, Washington State. The analysis that these students bring explores and assesses the ways in which these bills address 5 themes. 1, green energy. 2, green infrastructure. 3, emissions reductions. 4, just transition for workers. And 5, broad support from stakeholders in the community. It's really important for us to learn about how folks are organizing Green New Deal efforts around the country and who have lessons for those of us who are organizing our own efforts. So I beg of you, I urge you to check that report out, and I'll actually drop a URL in the chat in just a moment. But first, I want to thank and congratulate the authors of this report, UCSB students Miranda O'Brien and Ruth Alcantara Perez. So let me, before I continue, there you go, just drop that sucker in the chat. The other initiative, the other initiative I'd like to report on is an ongoing effort to develop a People's Green New Deal here on the Central Coast. And that effort has been spearheaded by folks who are here tonight, by folks like Ana Rosa Rizzo-Centino and the Climate Justice Network. She can talk more about that, but I want to discuss one of the primary methods that we have been pursuing to develop this Green New Deal. And this is through gathering people's stories, people's ideas, people's hopes, people's vision of what a Green New Deal could look like here in this community. And we've been doing this through what are called house meetings. These are gatherings of people in someone's home where people feel comfortable, safe enough to share ideas. This is a method that has been pioneered by social movements long ago, going back at least as far as the United Farm Workers, who saw this idea, this practice of house meetings as an important way of sharing knowledge and building power outside of the usual public places of public hearings on government property, where there might be risks and challenges for people who are undocumented or who need childcare services or translation services. House meetings can address all of those concerns. We have hosted numerous such meetings in our region, first in people's homes before COVID, and now after COVID hit, we have shifted to online meetings. So our plan is simple. We are gathering information from everyday people in order to create a framework for a Green New Deal on the Central Coast. A few themes that have emerged from some of these meetings include promoting solar power through zoning incentives, promoting county-backed setback zones so that, as we've seen elsewhere in California and the country, we can have maybe 2,500 feet between an oil operation and a school, or between an oil operation and someone's home. Another theme, ending offshore oil production, expanding affordable housing, indigenous justice, decarceration, and addressing environmental and social justice concerns throughout the prison industrial complex. Incentivizing companies to promote telecommuting, something that many of us are doing now on Zoom under COVID. Promoting project labor agreements for building a green economy. These are agreements that ensure that a certain percentage of jobs going to unionized workers for new development projects that would be a part of the Green New Deal. Expanding healthcare access and quality of healthcare, including and most especially for mental health care. Embracing food justice, food security, and sustainable agriculture. Improving public transportation, like having express lines buses between northern Santa Barbara County and Santa Barbara City. Climate resilience, disaster planning, disaster preparedness, and finally, expanding green spaces and accessibility to those spaces. And we're just getting started. So this is how environmental justice and climate justice work is done. We always seek to expand well beyond traditional quote unquote environmental concerns to be much more intersectional and integrative. So as you can see, we have a lively, inspiring, and exciting process for developing a Green New Deal here on the Central Coast. And I am honored and delighted to work with a great team of students and community leaders to make this happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David. Ana Rosa?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marcos Vargas, for the beautiful land acknowledgement. I also want to say thank you to the Chumash peoples for allowing me to be here and for all of us to be sharing this discussion right now. To begin with, I want to talk about why I am so passionate about the Green New Deal, because I do believe positionality matters. And as you can see, I'm a mother, and I feel like all parents, all of us parents should be fighting for a Green New Deal, because for our next generation, 7 generations after, we need it. And we need it because it's a way to start addressing the harm and utter destruction of colonization and capitalism and where it has led us to now. And as my counterpart, Dr. David Pellow, was saying as to why we chose house meetings, working class people are often not asked for their opinion about much of anything. So for us to develop this Green New Deal from the grassroots up, to talk to people and say, what is your experience like on a daily basis? What is going on in your community? How can the Green New Deal be a solution for what's going on in your community, the things that you see that can be improved? And it's been really beautiful to intentionally start that process in Santa Barbara County with Indigenous Chumash people. The very first house meeting that we had was in Orcutt at a Chumash leaders home. The next one was at the Dolores Huerta Co-op in Isla Vista. So definitely including students, because we know that students have been part of every single revolutionary movement you can think of. And with all Black, Indigenous people of color, focusing on those most impacted by climate injustice. And so, the green economy, I feel like we need to ensure as environmentalists that we are making sure that it is not another economy built on inequality. Because, sometimes you hear mainstream environmentalists talking about the Green New Deal in such a vacuum, where it's like, oh yes, green energy, but without talking about the people, right? What kind of jobs are we going to create? Are they going to be living wage jobs? Are they going to have project labor agreements? Is this going to be a just economy that has sustainability built in, right? Where parents like my mom won't have to work 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. 1 job should be enough. My friend in Los Angeles is leading a tree ambassadors program where they're actually paying people to take care of their trees and tell people about the trees. And, I feel like I need to say this over and over again, because Black, Indigenous people of color are so often asked for labor and not given anything in exchange for it. So pay Black, Indigenous people of color for taking care of the land, for being stewards of the land, for all of that we have to contribute to this green economy that we're building. And I mean, I really am excited for the conversation that we're gonna have and the exchange. So I wanna leave as much time as possible for that, because I really want to hear what your questions are. And yeah, it's been an honor to work with the Climate Justice Network, this effort. For Santa Barbara County, just so you know the timeline, we're gonna try to wrap up the house meeting campaign this upcoming month in March. And then the vision is to have a Junta Grande, or which means large meeting, in April on Earth Day. And then that'll be kind of the unveiling of what we're looking to propose to the Santa Barbara County for the Green New Deal in Santa Barbara County. And in Ventura County, we have also started having house meetings here where I'm now located. And so, if you're on the Central Coast, would love to get you a toolkit. If you need it in English or if you need it in Spanish, we have it in both languages. And I'm available for any hands-on assistance that you would need to get these meetings going. And again, it's like bite-sized organizing. So you don't have to try to get 20 people there. 5 people is perfect. If you want up to a dozen, it is great too. So yeah, it's been really fun to work with Dr. David Pellow, Maricela Morales, Savory Wright, Vanessa Terran, Genevieve, the folks at MyCup who have also been hosting house meetings with us, as well as 350 Santa Barbara and the EJCJ Hub, and I could go on and on. This is becoming a very big effort, which I'm really proud of.
Great. Thank you, Ana Rosa. Nadia?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Joanne and the Blum Center for hosting this event. And thank you to David and Onarosa that I couldn't have said it better, what you just said. And if you see me doing like this in my screen, that's like from Robert's Rules Cooperative meeting principles of like, I agree. So I encourage you, if you have your video on, to do that if you agree with anything anyone is saying. So my name is Nadia Lee Abushanab. As Alice mentioned, I am a recent graduate from the UCSB Environmental Studies Department. And I did actually write my undergraduate thesis on the Green New Deal with David as my advisor. So I'm really happy to be here having this conversation with you all. In December, I was hired as the Advocacy and Events Director for SB CAN, the Santa Barbara County Action Network. And I'm going to be talking about the work SB CAN has been focusing on. So for 19 years, SB CAN has been advocating for progressive issues and promoting economic, environmental, and social justice. SB CAN also supports the preservation of open space, agricultural, and natural resources in the county, and holistic, sustainable community development. But until very recently, SB CAN actually has not used the specific framing of the Green New Deal to inform or further our work. But that is not to say that this work hasn't been happening in Santa Barbara County. In fact, like several other organizations, SB CAN has been operating under the principles of the Green New Deal since our beginnings nearly 2 decades ago. So to me, I would say the 3 main principles of the Green New Deal are reducing emissions to limit the effects of global warming, creating and protecting green jobs, and addressing climate justice and inequity. And for California specifically, I would actually add a 4th principle that would be affordable housing and promoting housing justice. SB CAN has been a key player in several efforts relating to these principles over the many years, but I'll just touch on a few. So most recently, SB CAN celebrated a huge win in 2020 when all 3 of the companies that had applied for oil extraction permits in Santa Maria withdrew their applications. This was by no means done by SB CAN alone. In fact, I'm sure several of you were involved in this effort, but stopping new oil production is essential to the mitigation of the effects of climate change. So we were thrilled when we heard this news. Also, SB CAN is involved in the Sustainable University Now coalition with UCSB. We spent 2 years negotiating with UCSB to revise its long-range development plan to emphasize sustainability. Due to those conversations, UCSB promised to build sufficient and affordable student, faculty, and employee housing with the needs of the greater community in mind. UCSB is unfortunately behind on this goal, which is somewhat understandable due to the pandemic and remote learning being the norm, and meaning that students do not need to live in this area. But that will change eventually, and we do hope to start pushing them more on this soon, as there is such a huge need for housing in Isla Vista and in the entirety of Santa Barbara County. Lastly, around 5 or 6 years ago, SB CAN was part of a coalition of local unions that were organizing around increasing the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Fortunately, shortly after that, the state adopted the policy, making the coalition around that specific issue no longer necessary. But we have maintained relationships with several unions to this day through that effort. Some of our current issues, just really immediate issues, include stopping the development at the San Marcos foothills, protecting Oso Flaco Lake in San Luis Obispo, supporting the development of affordable housing in Santa Maria and across the county, monitoring the county redistricting process, and advocating for the reduction of cash bail in Santa Barbara County. So going forward and thinking about the Green New Deal, I really see SB CAN as a potential convening point for labor and environmentalists to have discussions about a fair and just transition and what that could actually look like at the local level. SBCAN's reach is truly countywide, but we actually mostly focus our attention in the North County, where there are more working class farm worker and oil worker communities and fewer progressive organizations. We have often been the only voice speaking in favor of progressive issues in North County. And our solutions really need to be based in trust and community. So it's really helpful to have this foundation of trust, accountability, and history throughout the county, but especially in North County, where a lot of these workers are living, before attempting to do this important intersectional work. Yeah, I could talk about the Green New Deal and just transition plans all day, but I'll just leave it there so we can have some time for questions, and I'll turn it over to Nikayla.
Great. Take it away, Nikayla.
Amazing. Thank you all for explaining the Green New Deal so well and putting on this event. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, and I haven't had the opportunity to do it being a grad student here, so I'm excited. Yeah, because the other panelists explained the Green New Deal so well, I can talk about the part that I find most inspirational, which is the freedom that it gives us to dream. And this is also my favorite part of being in a youth movement is I always find myself in a Zoom room, I guess now, with faces full of dreamers. So because the Green New Deal is not one specific piece of policy, right? It's like a national decade-long project to transform the country for justice and decarbonization. And for me in organizing and writing, like dreaming really is the first step, especially in times like these, like so heavy with death and despair, leaning on the Black tradition of placing yourself someplace far in the future, Stevie's place in the sun, and allowing the warmth of that day, not too far in the future, to power you forward. So this event is titled The Green New Deal in Action. So I like to bring it to life inside my head. So I invite you all to close your eyes with me and share my dream or dream of your own. So when I close my eyes and I picture driving from San Diego north along Highway 99 to visit my brother in Merced before I spend the weekend in the Sierras, I see the Green New Deal alive on my route. I see sustainable agriculture throughout the valley, grown with care for our planet and our bodies, and the migrant workers that tend the fields. And I see the rest stops lined with charging stations. I stop off to charge my own car and eat a quick snack. Enjoy spring sunset on the crisp and smogless horizon, fresh air in the valley, and the rumble of the high-speed train carrying people north to Sacramento. And more than what I see is what I feel. I feel safe and secure, feeling like for the first time in a long time, I have faith in the future. So when I'm up there hiking high, I can look out onto the curve of the earth and I see tomorrow tucked away, waiting to be turned over. And the project that we undertook as a country gives me absolute certainty that tomorrow will be better than today. Because the Green New Deal doesn't just work to make environmental harm equitable, right? Or just give people jobs. It works to make justice truly restorative and repair the historic damage inflicted on Black and Indigenous and working class and poor and immigrants. It's the first step to including all voices and a national project to rebuild America. And this time, not on our backs and with our blood, but shoulder to shoulder and with our hands. I'm talking about Black people having agency over community development and disaster planning, and Indigenous people having the right to their land and guiding us through caring for the earth, and immigrants from the southern border having rights and fair wages because their vision of our country makes it more perfect. And the Green New Deal, personally, is what I see as a first step towards abolition, decarbonizing the economy to avert disaster and give us more time to work at this shared dream of the future, creating economic and opportunity equity so days are spent working more than just to survive, more than just earning enough to keep food on the table and a roof over your heads, but so people have the time and the resources to build their communities and build themselves, so they have the time to organize. Because that's how you bring this abolitionist vision of the future to life, right? You have to organize it. In the Sunrise Movement, while Biden doesn't have a Green New Deal, we are one step closer because we organized for it. And throughout the election, I mean, we pressured and we took action and elected people to Congress that also believed in our shared dream. And it's not everything. I am not saying that we are anywhere close to where we need to be, or the Green New Deal is the end all to our problems, but it's a good first step. And the Green New Deal for me really is that path forward to loosening this rope around our necks, like the hundreds of years of violence and oppression and full denial of our rights, because this rope has been there for so long. And we all know that climate change makes it tighter, because who pays the biggest price for toxic air and hurricane and sea level rise? It's the people of color, it's the marginalized communities. But I think that the climate mitigation and adaptation part of the Green New Deal and the focus on job creation, it gives us the ability to take a breath so that we can continue to push forward for this shared dream of abolition. So looking forward on what we do, I really think, I mean, like, I think we're all in agreement here, right? Like, it's continuing to organize and it's keeping our eyes set on the future. And it is doing the electoral organizing, like locally and nationally, but also building local community coalitions around the Green New Deal. I mean, very much what is going on here on the Central Coast and all across the country too. Because it's like waiting on Washington is one thing, and I don't have a whole lot of faith in that. So I really believe that we need to bring the idea of the Green New Deal to the regional level. So that is my take on the Green New Deal. I find it very inspirational, and I think we're all here because we feel the same way.
Great. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the way this panel moved from the local, from the House to the visions, to the coast. And I very much appreciate, Michaela, the way you encourage us to keep the vision in mind. Because one of the things that strikes me as most important about this whole movement has been the kind of relentless, in the best sense of that word, relentless insistence that we do keep the big vision in mind. That this has been a movement that has not let itself fall into the trap of incrementalism and say that, you know, sort of half steps are enough. But that is one thing that does lead me to my first question, which goes back, and this is really for everyone, but it goes back to these House meetings and what actually happens at the House meetings. And I'm just wondering whether you find you need time to sort of get the framework out there. Is the framework itself an invitation to a conversation, or do you need to sort of work your way into the framework? I can imagine the conversation about a Green New Deal seeming like something absolutely huge, and how do you get from the big vision to the concrete steps that are being played out in these household meetings? That to me is a very interesting kind of both tension on the one hand, but balance on the other. Could you speak to how you actually make some of these visionary ideas concrete in those House meetings?
I mean, I would say it really depends on who you're meeting with. What I like to do is I start with a question on, have you heard about the Green New Deal? And seeing hands raising or not, and then going from there. Usually at least one person has heard of the Green New Deal, and then I ask them to say, hey, okay, so what have you heard about it? And then the conversation just goes from there. Also, there's a 7-minute video that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in. That's really great because it's nice and short, and it kind of discusses some of the framework on a national level. But I feel like I try to keep the explanation to a minimum, because I've been really surprised. Actually, not surprised. I knew this was going to come from our communities, because our communities are brilliant. A lot of great ideas that are not even necessarily in that national framework. So I would say that's how I kind of like to approach them. And there's a toolkit in English and Spanish that can be sent to folks if they need some more pointers or resources, that was worked on by several of us.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know David, you've hosted a house meeting before, so I don't know if you have anything else to say about that.
Yeah, I think you said it all. I mean, we definitely, just as you said, we like to strike that balance between making sure that everyone understands what the Green New Deal, the federal resolution is, but that this conversation, these House meetings are an opportunity to put our own stamp on that. I mean, I think for me, what AOC and Rihanna and Markey have done is create a template and an invitation for us to take something that is a beautiful and powerful and inspiring idea and make it our own, inject our own flavor, our own culture, our own biographies, our own regional history and our futurities into that framework. And so I see the federal Green New Deal. It's not really a bill. It's not even a piece of legislation so much as it is a template. And we're taking that seriously. And so, yes, but Ana Rosa, I just want to say it has been a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to work with her because she has really led this process and has insisted that it really, really reflect the diversity, the broad demographics of our region, so that people who are participating in this grassroots bottom-up process, unlike any other Green New Deal in the United States, are really going to feel some ownership over this process. So we are not bound by what the federal template is about. We are invited to create our own, and that's what we are doing.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering whether there have been some surprises in terms of ideas that have bubbled up through this process. Maybe things you hadn't heard before, or maybe angles of vision that hadn't been as prominent, or things that came out of this that turned out to be higher on people's agenda or lower on people's agenda than you thought they might be, at least thus far.
The students have already started looking at the results of the House meetings. I'll just say from the ones that I've been a part of, at least with the Indigenous communities, water rights, water access, and specifically creating infrastructure around bartering is something that has really come up. So yeah, that's not something that you necessarily typically hear about with the national framework, but it's something that has been coming up a lot with Indigenous communities, both with Chumash and actually Mixteco Indigenous folks.
Yeah, right. Nadia, one of the things that you were emphasizing was the degree to which SB Can is really focusing on working class communities. Traditionally, we often hear, I mean, in divisive efforts to divide and conquer movements, we often hear this, well, you're going to eliminate jobs, and these are well-paying jobs. I mean, I think we're sort of familiar with the pushback we often get in the abstract anyway. So can you talk some more about the actual experience of building, whether it's consensus or will or a common language, common discussion among working class communities? Can you talk about whether you've come upon those kinds of ideas, that this is going to eliminate jobs and we're reliant on this fossil fuel economy, and whether you see that as a barrier, or is there more openness than is often suggested?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've only been in this role since December, so I haven't had a chance to have as many of these conversations in this role specifically, but I did do a lot of interviews when I was doing my research, and I've been thinking about this a lot. And on the point of it eliminating jobs, I just find it so interesting because there are these two things that people say about the Green New Deal who are in opposition to it. And one is that it will eliminate jobs, and the other one is that it's too expensive. And the reason that it's expensive is because we have to pay people to do work, like that is why it costs money. And I was talking about this with with somebody else earlier this week, and they said, well, you shouldn't talk about it like spending, you should talk about it like investing. You know, we're creating green infrastructure and jobs and renewable energy, and it's not just spending, it's not just like, you know, it's investing in our future, it's what we have to do. So that would be one thing that I would say about that. And then I think something else too that I've heard from the oil workers around the Era Energy and other projects was like, I heard people say, oh, if I could get paid as well as I do planting trees as drilling oil, like I'd do that. And I'm like, okay, great, let's do that, you know, like what, sure. So, and I think also a lot of people dismiss the issue of losing jobs, like a lot of environmentalists, because they look and they say, oh, it's less than 1,000 people in Santa Barbara are employed by the oil industry or something around that. But that's not, and that's true. I mean, it's not a ton of people, but you do have to take them into consideration because the oil companies have a lot of political sway, you know, and we have to bring everybody along. So yeah, and another thing people say is like, oh, well, we'll have the just transition, but people have been talking about a just transition since like the 60s, the 70s, you know, it's something that actually oil companies started talking about internally when they realized that peak oil was coming and they needed to find a way to, they were looking for investment from the government in people and in jobs and not just in the environment when the EPA was starting and they were doing cleanups of Superfund sites and things like that. So yeah, I think like realizing where people are coming from is just so important, and being an ally to people. So something SB Can has done is make sure to advocate for project labor agreements and community workforce agreements on, say, renewable energy projects or any projects, you know, and if they see us there over and over advocating for them, then it's like, okay, we can come together on this issue, and then they'll be more likely, like we will be more likely to be able to work together in other ways.
Great.
Can I just say on that point regarding a fair and just transition, that it's not only transitioning away from oil, it's about transitioning away from all the systems that don't serve us. So, you know, during the House meeting campaign, George Floyd was killed, and the movement for Black Lives to Matter, you know, was pushing forward. And so, you know, David and I have also talked about how can we transition, have a fair and just transition away from prisons, away from, you know, policing. So abolition is also a conversation that enters this. And I was looking through the People's Guide that the Blum Center has been developing, and I saw a quote in there, and that was, the question of how to pay for the Green New Deal must take into account the tremendous cost of inaction. And that's from the new consensus the architect of the Green New Deal presented to Congress. And I think we cannot emphasize that part enough, because we always have money for war, right? How is it that we always have money for war, but we don't have money to invest in our future? That makes no sense. And so just pointing out the fallacies are really important.
Yes.
And Ralph, put yourself on mute.
Okay. Thank you. Great.
Alice,
Yeah,
just say
go ahead, please.
Yeah, amen to all of that, both Nadia and Ana Rosa's points. And I also just want to point out the irony. This very evening, right now, there is a House meeting that's actually going on among union workers, the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, having a House meeting this very evening around the Green New Deal. And that is because we have, from the very beginning, had folks like Ana Rosa, like Nadia, other folks who have strong ties to working class movements, to labor movements, who've been invested in that from the very beginning. It's never been an afterthought. It was never a box to be checked. I always say some of the least trustworthy people I know are environmentalists. If my job depended on the fossil fuel industry, I would never trust these environmentalists given their track record. But environmental justice folks, climate justice folks, Now we're talking. People who are serious about a just transition, people who are serious about respecting the need of people to put food on their table, on their plates, to pay the bills, to pay the rent. That cannot be an afterthought. That has to be the first thought. And that's how we've been approaching this. So labor's been there from the very beginning.
Yeah, great. So I want to just talk a little bit about scale. I mean, it seems to me we've got a few things going on. First of all, this is one of the things that makes this an amazing moment of opportunity is that the economy is in crisis right now. And we are talking about $1 trillion+ stimulus bill that's being proposed. And there are plenty of people who are trying to position themselves to say, well, let's make that as green. Let's make that green. Let's not make the same mistake that we made in 2008 and not take the opportunity of a stimulus bill to really move much more aggressively toward transition, towards a whole different kind of economy. On the other hand, I really take Michaela's point to heart when, in the course of talking about a beautiful vision for the future, she acknowledges we can't look to Washington necessarily for leadership. The action really does seem to be local right now. So in thinking about, the kinds of big changes and what actually can be accomplished at the local level, where, what you're thinking, and this is really a question for everybody, what you're thinking about that. Is currently working at the regional level take on some of these big kind of job creation, massive spending, infrastructure building kinds of visions that are associated with the Green New Deal? Or is the task at the local level to look more at the sort of points of leverage? That's for anybody.
I mean, honestly, I think that's part of one of the biggest reasons why we went with having a House meeting campaign to get these going, because as we do the campaign, we're building a cadre of folks who are down to, organize for these issues. And I think, if we have major institutions like UCSB, like Cal State University Channel Islands, like the different city governments, the county governments, we can absolutely do it together. And we are speaking with each other right now. Through the Equity Advisory Committee, right at the Santa Barbara County level, through the Climate Justice Network, through these conversations that we're having right now with you all at the Blum Center. So I think it just takes that investment, and the organizing, is happening, so we can really push on a regional level.
Right. Okay. Michaela, I'm not seeing your picture here, but I wanted to check in with you about some of the things you were saying about you're feeling inspired, but also the work you've been doing with the Sunrise Movement. Clearly, youth has been playing a huge role in this movement. And I think that's where, I'm heartened to hear that some of the relentlessness is coming from within your House meetings, which is great. But the most relentless voices I hear in these conversations have been coming from my students. There's this sort of like, we're not going to stand for half measures. But can you speak just in terms of your own organizing work, why it is, why it is this movement, this vision, this Green New Deal, something from the 1930s. Frankly, I'm always, as a historian, I love the fact that my students are talking the language of the New Deal and are embracing this idea. But why is it that I'd like to hear some reflection about the kind of energy and why you think it's kind of captured the imaginations of your generation?
I think there's among young people a lot of political drama. Not drama, but also trauma. I was born in 1996, right? So like thinking about how I have come of age in the United States of America, wow, we're still at war, I think, in the Middle East. That's unclear. Don't really know why we're there to begin with. Coming off the back of 2008 financial crash, growing up being terrified of just going to class because you could be shot. Like seeing your parents lose their jobs and their houses and their retirement, and then the climate crisis on top of everything else. We look to the future and we just feel absolutely screwed. We're like, there's nothing left for us. The boomers have raided the social security accounts and like left us out to dry. So I think it's kind of this generational anger that we all feel, but also realizing that we are going to be around for a long time. And if we're going to survive, it has to be a collective effort towards a vision. And what I find personally so inspirational about the young people involved in the climate movement is it's not just young people on the left. Like young Republicans are motivated to take action too. And that just brings me so much hope for that when we as young people come into formal political power, that we will have a consensus that, you know, climate crisis is something that we're not going to deny, but we are going to address like our life depends on it, because it really does.
Well, so just speaking though of the young Republicans you find engaged in this. So, I mean, I'll bring up the C word and the S word, the capitalism word and the socialism word. I mean, I do hear from certainly a lot of students on the left that we need to be willing in ways that we haven't been. I'm hearing from students a willingness to think beyond capitalism and actually to say we don't want to find ourselves stuck in the capitalist agenda. That's not something I hear from students who self-identify as Republican. So where's the, you know, where are the points of tension, but also sort of willingness to pull together on these things? Or do you see those tensions as a barrier or something that can be worked through?
I would say that it's a really good place to start, right? We can all agree on every side that climate change is an awful issue that needs to be addressed immediately, which is so much farther along than say their parents. You know, with them, we can't even say the word. They think it's a hoax or whatever. So with young people who identify as being Republican, there are still leaps and bounds to be made around how to solve the issue specifically. I mean, I advocate, capitalism, like let's burn it down. You know, that's what side I'm on here. And I think maybe in time, young Republicans could get there with effective organizing and propaganda, you know. But for right now, I think that having them on our side as far as admitting that climate change is a crisis and we need to take steps to address it is like a really good place to begin.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I have one more question and then I really want to open it up to everyone. I mean, the pandemic obviously is a terrible human tragedy, and I don't want to fall in the trap to say, you know, in crisis we find opportunity, because that's just such a glib thing to say. But I would like to hear from you about how the kind of day-to-day work has been affected by the fact that we are doing so much of it in Zoom rooms, that we have to do a lot of workarounds. You know, has that been a hindrance? Has that slowed you down? On the other hand, has it been a kind of an awakening for people? I'm curious about how you see the pandemic playing into your own work on pushing forward the Green New Deal. Nadia, can we start with you on that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, just at the really like foundational level, I would say like, if I started this role in a non-COVID time, I would be driving to Santa Maria several times per week. You know, I live in Santa Barbara, and I'd be going to Carpinteria and all these other places, and instead we're all just telecommuting. And I've heard several people say like, oh, my gas bill has been the lowest it's ever been this year. So, and that's our biggest source of emissions in this county is single car commuters. So I hope that when this ends, that is something that can stay, is that people can get used to telecommuting. on a more broader level, what I've been really interested in, you know, the stimulus that has been happening, and especially in other countries, like people are essentially getting a basic income every month to stay home, to slow the spread. And we're not really doing that in the US, and we have the worst pandemic numbers. But I mean, there was a $2 trillion stimulus bill at the beginning of the pandemic. Like that is now possible. And when we're talking about just transition, I think, you know, we're like, oh, we need to make up jobs for all these people to do. Like there's plenty of work to be done, but people just need income, really. So why couldn't we just pay people a basic income or a minimum income or something like that? Yeah, I think it does open up these possibilities in some really meaningful ways.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in on that before we open it up to our wonderful audience?
I mean, I just want to say that this pandemic has showed people that the workers that are most disrespected are the ones that you depend on the most. So farm workers who you think are so unskilled, you would not be able to feed yourself. And if you ever try farm working for a day, you will know that it is not an unskilled labor. So if you ever hear someone say that to you again, like that conversation needs to be addressed. Grocery store workers, right, who are getting COVID like crazy, just like farm workers are. You know, people need a living wage. These are people that we can't live without. Teachers, right, who, you know, have to do triple work now. And now parents, right, who also have to be teachers' assistants. You know, like the level of disrespect for people who are essential to our communities. I think the fact that the curtain has been pulled away from that and people can now see people for their worth instead of before pretending like, you know, those are people who we don't value and who we don't pay enough. And so that, you know, people are dying. So I agree with you, Alice. We can't be saying like, oh, this is an opportunity, but I do want to address the fact that at least now we can't lie about shit anymore. Excuse my language. Like, you know, we need to get people.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll lift up everything that was just said. Thank you so much for that question as well. I mean, yeah, all of us who are doing this particular work, you know, we're doing our work online. And as someone just said in the chat, you know, it sucks. It's really, the quality of the work is really suffering. And of course, perhaps one of the most important things in all of this is the need to build community and to sustain community. And that, of course, is very difficult in Zoomlandia, as I call it, but we persist nonetheless. I would also say, you know, we've all known, those of us who are honest and transparent about it, that COVID is reminding us of a whole host of disparities that existed prior to the pandemic and that have now been amplified, and we have to address those. And, you know, on a positive note, I would say COVID has also reminded us that we are all, for better or worse, intimately interconnected, and there is no such thing as an individual. We are all entangled with and linked to one another. We need to respect that fact and build on it. And finally, I would say that some of the most positive and beautiful things that we have seen during this crisis is the reemergence and the amplification of mutual aid. People coming together and to provide resources, critical resources for folks who need food, who need education, who need PPE, masks, clothing, healthcare, all of these things that the government and certainly corporate America are not willing to provide or not able to provide in some cases. So for me, when we talk about a post-COVID world, I pray every night that we see a multiplication, a billion-fold of the extraordinary industry that I would call the mutual aid effect, the mutual aid culture that people are promoting in our communities. We've seen it in Dallas and Fort Worth, -2 degrees Fahrenheit. People were out there providing things for folks when the government was absent, didn't give a damn. I got a friend in New York City, part of a collective that sewed literally tens of thousands of masks for people when the government was absent. We need to continue that movement and that momentum. And for me, that's one of the bright spots that this pandemic, or at least the response to the pandemic, has brought to the fore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been a radicalizing moment, right? A radicalizing moment in opening, actually, in opening a conversation about radical possibilities. And I mean radical in the most fundamental way, like fundamental. Okay, so not fundamentalist. So we have opened up the chat. Are people putting questions in the chat? Joanne, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So have we gotten questions?
Yes. Did you want us? We can read off one or two.
I'm not seeing them.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah,
Sure.
Go ahead. Yes, please do.
Great. Okay. So one of the earlier questions we had was from Susan Horn, and she had asked if Green New Deal advocates are participating in current Santa Barbara city meetings for gathering ideas on climate change. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that's actually the main thing that I am doing like day to day for my job, is going to city council and planning commission and other local government meetings and advocating for different issues. And there was actually one meeting a couple weeks ago at the Santa Barbara City Council where they were discussing a community workforce agreement for projects in the city above $2 million threshold or something like that. And City Council member Megan Harmon and Mayor Kathy Murillo during that meeting scheduled a time to meet with the labor organizers who were there giving public comment about creating a just transition plan for the city of Santa Barbara. So I don't know what has happened with that, but it definitely is very much a conversation in those spaces, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Joanne, do you have other questions? Because I'm not seeing the list. Although actually one thing I wouldn't mind following up on that, just in terms of the local. What are we going to do about affordable housing? I mean, clearly affordable housing is a really big part, or different, and I say affordable housing, really just the same way we're talking about a different model for the economy, we need to be thinking about different models for housing. I mean, it's just talk about unsustainable. So I'm wondering, we've talked some about jobs, but in the House meetings, but also in those meetings with local officials, do you get the sense that people are getting real about addressing affordable housing as part of building a sustainable economy, either in the discussions or in the discussion with local leaders?
I mean, I don't want to take up too much space, but I will say there was a affordable housing proposed development in the city of Santa Maria, and SBCAN was the only person or the only organization, I guess, who came and gave a supportive public comment on that project. And every other comment was a neighbor or a nearby homeowner who was talking about, oh, criminals are going to be moving in and they're going to be addicted to drugs and they're going to park all over the streets. And yeah, and they did have to approve it because of California zoning laws, but I would say that it's a huge hurdle for the county.
Okay. Thank you. Joanne?
Yes. We also had a question. I think Ana Rosa had spoken to this a little bit, but if we could hear a bit more about some of the ideas that are coming out at the House meetings that you've attended, that there seems to be a lot of interest in what's going on in those House meetings and what's being shared.
I mean, more cooperatives is another thing that has come up. Although I really want to say stay tuned for what we're going to be coming up with, because I don't want to give like pieces of it. So yeah, I feel like this panel is kind of a teaser for what's coming soon. But Dr. David Pellow, if you have anything else to share from what you and the students have been viewing, because you all have had access to more of the data than I have.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Ana Rosa. I don't want to give too much away, at this early stage. But as I said earlier, just a taste of some of the things that we've seen coming out of the House meetings. Some of which were expected, others of which were maybe surprising, and still others that I think really do reflect that local flair or local flavor of the Central Coast, of what we're dealing with in California. Again, this push for county mandated setback zones, which are scientifically based, meaning this, has been scientifically documented that you need at least 2,500 feet between an oil drilling operation, right, and a residential community or a school community. This is something that we have seen successfully achieved in various parts of California. That's something that we're pushing for, or at least has come up in these meetings. Ana Rosa, one of the many House meetings that Ana Rosa Rizzo Centino hosted, I know one of the things came up was, it was this summer, right? Well, we saw the uprising around the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black lives, and decarceration and defunding of the police was something that that was raised in a number of these conversations. And not surprisingly, I would say, given the hell that so many of us in California and in this region have been through with respect to drought, with respect to what so-called wildfires, climate resilience and disaster planning and preparedness have come up. And of course, I said last but not least, let me really end with, given that one of the leading industries in this area, of course, is agriculture, and so many of our family members and friends and colleagues work in that industry, sustainable, equitable, and just agriculture is something that has come up repeatedly in these conversations. So those are just a taste of what we've been hearing.
Great. There is another question before we wrap up. Maybe you'll give us a sense of the plan. I mean, it sounds like there's a report that's going to come out, a kind of comprehensive report that's going to come out from these House meetings, and we'll all be keeping an eye out for it. So there's a question here from Judy Birch. What do we tell the oil workers in Orchid at Cat Canyon as far as retraining them in alternative energy so they feel secure with job income? This goes back to that question about people who feel like they have good, well-paying jobs. What are you doing, taking them away from this? So what are some thoughts about that? And what have been some of the conversations around that? I mean, what about that? If a job planting trees would pay me as much as a job in the oil industry, I'd be all for it. I mean, this was kind of going back to some of the questions I was raising before about scale. About if we are going to, what is it that we have to look to the feds for? What is it that we have to, hold their feet to the fire for, to say, look, if you're serious about enabling this to happen, here's where we need what the federal government can do, versus here's what we need from state and local officials.
Yeah,
Alice, are you going to open it up to others?
Yes, we are, and that's what I've been taking the questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
But
That's
since you're before us, ask your question, please do.
Well, it's more than a question. I'm here to make some suggestions. As many of you already know, Central Coast Community Energy is already starting to build the basic foundations of a Green New Deal here in the Central Coast in the 5-county region. I'm a member of SPCAN, but I'm also a member of People for Public Banking Central Coast, and our objective is to build a public bank in the 5-county region of the Central Coast, and we're working very closely with 3CE because they need that kind of financing to, build big battery stations, to build new generation capacity. And so we are in a process right now of putting together the paperwork that we plan to send to the Santa Barbara Board of Supervisors to get them to join with the other 4 counties so that we can build this regional bank and make low interest loans to 3CE and others, as well as cities and counties, and help recover from the COVID crisis that we're in now. So we really need your help and support. I would love to, hear people here who would be willing to give a 3-minute speech to the Board of Supervisors when it's on their agenda in support of forming the Central Coast Public Bank.
How can we find out more?
Well, I put my email address in the chat. Anyone who wants to contact me, Harold Hill, and contact me. And I'm in the process right now of sending out dozens of emails to various governmental agencies, city council members, anyone who's interested in the benefits of a public bank. Most people don't realize it, but we have a very successful public bank in North Dakota that's over 100 years old in this country. And if we can form a public bank here on the Central Coast, it can borrow from the Federal Reserve at 0.25% and offer really low interest loans. And the profits, instead of going to pay dividends to stockholders, will go into the government treasury to build more things in our area.
Great. So I have, and thank you for putting your email address in there, because I think people would like to learn more about the work that you're doing. I see a hand up from Ash.
Hi, my question is, how can we make more jobs for young people that want to have meaningful jobs? One idea that I think might be the answer is empowering young adults to create more nonprofits and then offer jobs to young people who are interested in doing community organizing, but or other meaningful jobs, whether that be like coming with solutions for like housing issues or like sustainable agriculture or like, all the things we care about. But yeah, I just want to open up to the panel if you have thoughts on good jobs for young people.
Yes.
One of my favorite parts about the Green New Deal is the civilian climate corps. Honestly, the idea of it is so exciting. It's like a summer camp for people in their 20s. So I think Joe Biden has like committed to this.
Yes.
So I would encourage you to look into it. Yeah, when it's going to be rolled out as a program.
Yes. There is an actual proposal for that. And yes, it just takes off from the Civilian Conservation Corps, the original. But let's hope this one is a little less militaristic than that one was. Let's learn from the past. But I agree with you. I think that's a really promising idea. So I am okay. Looking through. here's a question from Stanley. What are ways in which community members can support building an organized base of support for Green New Deal policies? How do we help build a movement regionally for a just transition? So we've got SB Can, we've got the Climate Justice Network. Is there more infrastructural work to be done in terms of sort of building the institutional base for a Green New Deal movement? It's kind of the way I read Stanley's question.
Sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
Well, Stanley was asking, what are ways in which community members can support building an organized base of support for Green New Deal policies? I feel like, again, I think that's a lot of the work that both SB Can and the Climate Justice Network have been actually trying to build that kind of coalitional infrastructure. Are there more people that need to be at the table who aren't at the table? You know, is there more kind of infrastructural work to be done, or do you feel like there's a good organized base of support?
I mean, always the more the merrier. There's always work to be done. Happy to have more folks involved. Also, I would say just when, you know, our different bodies of government are talking about their budgets are statements of priority. So we should be bringing this up, you know, at city council meetings, at county board of supervisor meetings, every chance we get. And people are so polite to elected officials on the Central Coast. Sometimes we really have to hold people's feet to the fire, and we shouldn't be afraid of doing that.
Yeah, and if I could build on that, I think, and budgets are often described as moral documents as well, right? They reflect our values. And I think that's exactly right. And on Rosa, since you've put in the chat your contact information, I just want to lift that up again in response to your question, Alice. One thing people can do in this very grassroots bottom-up effort to create a Green New Deal framework in this region is, if you are willing and able, to host your own house meeting. And we can provide you with the resources. We can, in many cases, we can provide you with a co-host who can be there with you. The script, all of the information you need to host a house meeting, and to then share the information from that, so it is fed directly into the process of building a Green New Deal. And as we move forward with presenting that framework to our elected officials, we will be counting on all of you, everyone, to promote that and to bring your bodies out to hearings and to testify, provide testimony as to what you want to see in a Green New Deal and your support of this effort. So there will be many points along the way where we can use folks' help. But right now, today, this week, you can start organizing a house meeting, and we would love it if you would do that.
Okay, so David, if people want to do that, they should get in touch with you. Is there, I'm seeing a lot of yes, sign me up. What's a good place? Is there a website? Is there a contact person that they should follow up with? Because we're going to now hold everyone's feet to the fire who just said they want to have a house meeting. We're taking your names.
Ana Rosa, do you want to unmute and offer some thoughts?
We actually have 3 websites now. We have to consolidate them into one to make it easy for people. So we'll get back to you, although I did just save the chat. So yes, we will definitely reach out to you. But if you would like to reach out to us first, feel free to do that, either David or myself or anyone else who's here from CJN, because I haven't been able to scroll through the whole participant list, but for sure, at the very least, David and I.
Great, and we can share that information as well. The Blum Center can share the information you send to us. Okay, so Joanne, you have a question that I have not able to get access to. Can you read that question out?
Yes. So this was a question from Mark a little earlier, who is speaking in sophisticated scientific terms. So generally, I think he is suggesting that since the technology for nuclear energy has improved in terms of the waste that gets produced with that power, if the panelists have any thoughts about why it is not being considered as a more sort of primary alternative for energy sources.
Well, I could offer a response to that and say, of course, thanks to Mark for that question, and thanks also to Kate for offering, at least on 2 occasions, a really important point in the chat, and that is, to my knowledge, and I may be wrong on this, but perhaps the most ecologically and socially destructive practice that we engage in as human beings is militarization, war making, and the broader ideology that supports that, militarism. Now, Mark and others might say, well, that doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with nuclear power. And of course, there's an argument to be made for that, but far too often it does. And from an environmental justice, climate justice, and social justice standpoint, I would say 2 things. The first is, it is widely believed that nuclear power is a zero emissions industry, and one can make that argument. It is a tortured argument, unfortunately, because in the real world, to make the nuclear industry work, we actually have been using fossil fuels for transportation, for distribution, for so much of the entire infrastructure that also, again, is often used to support militarization. The second and last thing I'll say about that is I cannot look Pacific Islanders and indigenous folks in the eyes and say that I support nuclear power, nuclearization, when so many of their communities have been devastated for generations to come, precisely because of the mentality, the practices, and the policies that have supported that. But I want to be open to debating this question. So I don't, as Professor O'Connor said, I don't want to be a fundamentalist. I'm open to new ideas, and I might be wrong, but I'm just raising what are really serious concerns that not only humans, but our more than human relations around the world have felt and experienced the pain and the anguish of nuclearization.
Okay. Thank you, David. We are actually coming close to the end of our time, and I want to make sure that I leave time for Lane Clark, the president of CLUE, also co-sponsor of this event, to step in to say a few words. Lane?
Thank you. I just had to unmute there for a second. I guess I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Here on behalf of CLUE, which most of you know is Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. We often take on the role of bringing a moral and ethical voice into some of these policy debates at the local level. And I think sometimes people are willing to listen to us because of our connection to faith traditions and people of conscience. The gathering tonight shows that many of us are beginning to listen to something like a planetary conscience. And I think the settler colonial relationship to the earth is becoming more and more obviously not sustainable, that things are falling apart. And we're living in a time of mass extinctions and gross inequality, and humans taking up more and more of the habitat and spoiling more and more of the environment, while we see people profiting and other people going hungry. So I think it's natural that we feel a need to grieve. And I guess I want to advocate for, although this very hopeful event, so many hopeful things that we're talking about, but the other side is, I think we also do owe it to ourselves to allow ourselves to grieve over what's being lost. And in many traditions for mourning, they advocate people coming to get together to remember what we love and what we cherish and what's being lost, but then also to celebrate the community and the continuity of life. So I guess what I want to say is I think we shouldn't be afraid to allow ourselves to feel the unease that comes from living out of balance. Because I think recognizing this unease is the first step towards making the radical kind of change toward repair that we're all talking about. So I'd say let's remember to take time to be grateful for this beautiful and complex and interconnected world that we're part of. And let's also allow ourselves to envision a planet restored and a way of living that honors the whole web of life, in a world that respects the dignity and the aspirations of all of us. So this solidarity will be the key.
Yes.
And it's going to take all of us to turn it around. So thank you all for coming together tonight.
Thank you, Lane, for those words. That's a wonderful way to transition to just a transition to any closing thoughts from any of our panelists, specifically about beyond holding a house party and beyond going to some of the meetings that people are announcing in the chat room. Are there specific things that you would like to encourage people to get engaged in? Are there initiatives at CLUE, for example, that you would encourage people to get involved in? Are there other ways of people getting involved besides some of the things we've already talked about?
I mean, since I'm Secretary of CLUE, I'll say too, we have a new Racial Justice Committee. And part of this all, I think, is us being in right relationship with each other. So being anti-racist is also a big effort that, you know, if we do we can't do the Green New Deal without also being anti-racist, is my opinion. So let's all hold ourselves accountable to saying things in the meeting when it needs to be said, and not just, you know, after the meeting, and standing up for people when they need to be stood up for.
Thank you.
I would also say it's not necessarily a specific action or initiative, but I think just realizing and educating and opening up the conversation to the people around you that these things are already happening. Like I said, it doesn't, just because it doesn't have the Green New Deal name attached to it, people have known that environmental justice and social justice and reduction of emissions needs to happen and needs to happen together and at once, and that these issues are affecting everybody, and people have been doing that work, like I said, for decades. So I think a lot of people push back against the Green New Deal because there's been a lot of negative propaganda around it. But you know, I mean, Biden was like, oh, we're not doing the Green New Deal, and then announces the Civilian Climate Corps, which is like a main idea, like the CCC of the New Deal, you know? So I think, yeah, having those conversations, and I personally, I don't really care if it's called the Green New Deal or what. I just want these things to happen and for us to have a sustainable, livable future, right? So figuring out who you're talking to and orienting the conversation around that, I think, is really important to bring us together and to not get stuck on these.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else with a closing thought? Well, my closing thought is we will, and maybe we'll collaborate with David to also get the word out about the report that your students have put together, if that's going to be publicly available, David. But we are eager to make both of these guides to the Green New Deal, Green New Deal at the state level, the Green New Deal nationally and locally, the Green New Deal as a vision, as an inspiration, and as, above all, as an agenda for action. I really want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. To be continued, and please stay in touch with one another and with this entire network. Thank you.